You're listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Crawford, and we have a special episode today. I interview 1% for the Planet CEO, Kate Williams. And the reason this episode is special is because when I started my company, Emerger Strategies, one of the first things I did was become a 1% for the Planet member because I wanted to give back to environmental nonprofits that are working to solve environmental problems like climate change. And so when I reached out to Kate, I was really excited that she accepted to do the interview because this organization means a lot to me personally. So in this interview, we take a deep dive into 1% for the Planet, their recent partnership with Bank of the West, looking at challenges as opportunities, and hope for the future for our planet. Hope you enjoy. This episode of The Sustainable Angler is brought to you by Emerger Strategies, a sustainable business consultancy whose mission is to solve the climate crisis by helping your business go carbon neutral and zero waste. To learn more, visit emergerstrategies.com. So today I have Kate Williams, CEO of 1% for the Planet. Thanks for joining the Sustainable Angler podcast today.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. So Kate, I kind of wanted to learn a little bit more just to get things started out or kicked off, I should say, about how did you wind up working at 1% for the Planet and what was your background? I guess, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So, in terms of how I wound up here, I'd say it's a little combination of preparation and serendipity, which I think is true for a lot of life in my experience, at least, probably a lot of fishing as well. But so I've always, ever since college, my work and as well as, my passion has been the outdoors and the environment. And so, that's where the sort of preparation comes in. I've just basically, when I was 18, I had kind of a mountaintop experience in Wyoming and just realized, I love this. I love these wild places and I want to do whatever I can to connect other people to these experiences, but also to make sure that we have a healthy planet for the future. So in some way or another, I've always been working in, one of those two categories. I was an outdoor educator for the first 10 years after college. And then I switched over to being more on the kind of conservation advocacy side, working in nonprofits. And, the kind of last leg of the journey, was definitely serendipity. 1% for the Planet for a while was based in the small town in Vermont where I lived, just somewhat randomly. And so I got to know the team there. And my other job was I actually ran a long distance paddling trail across northern New England, on which
cool.
There's a lot of great fishing. But I did that for 10 years and was just kind of ready for a change and ended up having some conversations with the 1% for the Planet team and joined as the director of partnerships. And then a year later became CEO. So it's been a great journey.
That's amazing. That's super cool. So I have it's pretty funny. And maybe this is kind of common it probably is a common story for folks who kind of fall in love with, have an experience outdoors that triggers, because it happened to me also, triggers you to go, I think that it's almost like you find your purpose and that you go, I think I want to make sure that this is here forever.
Yeah.
And ultimately you protect what you love. So, I'm curious, you mentioned, I used to live in Jackson Hole. So you mentioned a mountain in Wyoming. Where was it when you sort of had your moment?
Yeah. So when I was 18, it was I think 3 or 4 days after I graduated from high school, I grew up outside of Boston in a little town called Belmont. And I was given a course with the National Outdoor Leadership School for my graduation present. My parents gave me that. And
Oh,
so I
nice.
got on a plane and flew out to Wyoming. And so I was in the Wind River Range. And we did, I actually don't remember the peaks, but it was at Haley Pass.
Uh-huh.
In the Wind River Range, we had actually just evacuated one of our instructors who broke his leg, and this had been like a 24-hour experience during which there had been a July snowstorm, and it's one of those things that in many ways was horrible.
Right.
But I just remember this moment when the sun was setting, that we had it was a helicopter evac, which was pre-cell phone, so required all sorts of effort, and we were exhausted and hungry and feet were wet and all of those things that you could complain about, but it was so beautiful, and we had just had such a feeling of accomplishment, and the instructor was safe, and so that was my moment on Haley Pass in the Wind River Range at sunset.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can't pinpoint my moment, but I got introduced to fly fishing when I moved out west and just kind of fell in love with the sport and everything that it involved, learning entomology and camping and just being outside. And it was just over the course of a few years, it just kind of evolved into a like, this is what I want to do. I just want to protect this.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have one follow-up question also. I would love to just hear just briefly about the your kayak trail, because that sounds pretty incredible.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that was my life work for 10 solid years. So it's a long distance trail based on historic native travel routes east-west across northern New England and the Adirondacks. And the reason, water routes were so important is that all of the geography in that area is north-south. So you have the Green Mountains, the White Mountains, and then other ranges that run north-south. So it's pretty hard to get east-west. And so the rivers were really important for a long time for travel. And so there were these guys in the like late 80s, 90s who really mapped out like how did people travel across and how did they connect different watersheds. And so from that basis, this long distance trail was born as connecting a bunch of those different routes. So it went from the western edge of the Adirondacks up through northern Vermont and into Quebec, and then back into New Hampshire, and about half of the trail is in Maine, kind of going way up into northern Maine and ending at Fort Kent. And it was really amazing. It was 740 miles.
Wow.
People would through paddle it, but it was also really well set up for, and it connected a bunch of different watersheds. So it wasn't like through paddling, it meant you got on like the Mississippi River and followed it to the mouth. It was more like you got on and paddled upstream here and downstream there and portaged here. So it was definitely a really big adventure, but people did it in sections, or, I never did all of it, but I did a lot of parts of it. Usually I usually chose to go downstream. But yeah, it was really great. It went right through communities. So we had really strong ties to the communities we went through, and we did all the mapping. So we developed a whole set of maps covering it and worked with each of the states to promote it and, drive business to local guide services. We didn't create any of our own businesses in that way, just because we really wanted it to be a driver for economic impact. And we definitely had, our purpose wasn't fishing, but we definitely had a lot of people interested in like kayaking and fishing, and we would get and collect and also help promote what are some of the best fishing spots along the way and things like that, or birding, or where can you paddle and hike. So we really tried to put the pieces together for people.
That is super cool. Like, you've got my wheels turning like 100 miles an hour. Like, I want to do it and bring my fly rod. That's cool. Okay. So you have, you had your background and sort of fell in love with outdoors, and you're at 1% for the planet. And for those of you who don't know, emerger strategies and this podcast, the Sustainable Angler, we donate 1% of our sales through 1% for the Planet to environmental nonprofits. So we're a proud 1% for the Planet member. That said, Kate, could you give us an elevator pitch, I guess, for
Sure.
those listening to this who maybe are not familiar with 1% for the Planet?
Yeah, and thank you for giving such a great elevator pitch as a member. The way it works is that we have member companies all over the world who give, and the way they become members is that they commit to giving annually 1% of their top line sales to environmental nonprofits. And we're not a foundation, so the money doesn't pass through us. We just help make it happen and help tell the story of the impact and, really help develop giving strategies for members who, care about different issues, but may not know exactly what the best way or best nonprofit is to give to. We also have individual membership. So in total, we have about 4,500 members globally. We're about half US at this point, half international. And we're in all different industries. So it's not just outdoor oriented businesses. We have a bank that created a 1% for the Planet checking account, Bank of the West. We have architecture firms. We have fashion brands. We have, pretty much you name it. It's all, some crazy, wonderful brands across different industries. And then likewise on the nonprofit side, we aren't focused on just one issue. We organize our nonprofits into 6 different categories so our brains can handle it.
Right.
So climate, food, land, water, wildlife, and pollution. And that also helps companies to, identify, hey, we're a fashion brand that creates a lot of clothing, that people might wear in the summer and go to the beach. So maybe we should focus on the water area and give to, some nonprofits, 1 or more nonprofits that are working on issues related to ocean health or something like that. We help sort of develop that kind of logic, because what we really want to see is brands having the opportunity to see how your giving isn't just a nice thing that you do at the end of the year. If you have a little money left over, it can actually become this really great part of your strategy, and it can be a great way that you grow your brand and just tell a really powerful story, which consumers really want to hear these days. I mean, people want to buy from brands who are, legitimately and authentically connecting to and driving purpose.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I'll say that as sort of a testimonial, as a 1% for the Planet member. And anyone considering it, if you're like, oh, I'm kind of thinking about it, I don't know, there's a few things you should know. One is 1% for the Planet is very easy and simple, and it's a pretty relatively straightforward process to become a member. It's not like this long, complex process, so it's easy to do. Secondly, I really like that it's broken down into buckets. Big focus of emerger strategies is solving the climate crisis. So it's really easy for me to go in and I've actually found some nonprofits that I wasn't even aware of that are doing amazing climate work, that are sort of like on my list of, okay, I've sort of narrowed it down, and maybe next year or this year, I'll donate to this one because I really like what they're doing. So it's easy to find how you're looking to make an impact and do that. And then, as Kate said, it becomes part of your culture and your identity, and it makes for good marketing, and good in the sense that, you're being rewarded for doing the right thing, because that's what ultimately at the end of the day, the consumers are increasingly looking for. And the 1% for the Planet logo is very identifiable, and it makes it easy for them when they see that to automatically say, okay, this company cares. If I'm considering 2 comparable products, one's a member, one's not, I'm going to support the 1% for the Planet member. So all that's to say is thanks for making this such an easy and simple thing to do. And also, I recently just made because of COVID, everything got pushed. And so I recently just got all my tax returns and all that stuff figured out so that I can make my donation. And I'll say it's like probably one of my favorite days of the year, when I get to sit down and write those checks and make those donations and know that, as the success of your business is making a positive impact, and it almost becomes like a positive feedback loop. And so you're doing well by doing good, and you're donating to those who are out there working on solving problems that you're concerned about. So it's just a kind of a virtuous cycle, and proud to be a part of it. So that's my plug. You should be a member.
Awesome. And thank you so much for just nailing the values. And that makes me so, so happy to hear that, you're experiencing all of that, because that's what we're all about. So that's really great to hear. Thank you for stating that all so clearly. And we would love for others to join, because one thing I would add too is it's a really great community. When we're not in the midst of a pandemic, we do a lot of events and have a global summit annually that is a great way to connect. But even when we're just virtual, we have members who are learning from each other and getting ideas from each other and getting inspired by each other. And as you said, Rick, also, learning about new nonprofits and new ways to drive change. So the community effect is a really powerful piece of it as well.
Yeah. I agree. So one of the things you mentioned, and I've read some articles about this, and I want to hear more about it because it's a really it sounds really exciting. And could you just tell us a little bit more about this Bank of the West 1% for the Planet sort of partnership and what that means?
Yeah, definitely. I just got my my debit card for the Planet checking account yesterday. So perfect timing. So yeah, Bank of the West is a major bank, and they are a major bank to watch because they are the leading major bank in terms of committing to use their money to drive positive change and not to support negative change. And specifically, they are very clear about not investing in projects that drive climate change. So, they're not investing in projects in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. They also have other environmental filters. They're not investing in tobacco or palm oil. And they're recognized, like when, different studies do like rankings of banks, they always come out near the top for the policies that they have. So they're a really great bank. And then we got connected and they want to do more. And so with their 1% for the Planet partnership, they've created this checking account, which is a new account, and it doesn't cost the depositors anything. So if you were to put your money there, it wouldn't be like you'd lose 1%. They take 1% off what they, the interest that they earn. And then they also, they're investing that in environmental nonprofits. Right now, one of their big partners is Protect Our Winters,
Yep.
Who's a great nonprofit working on climate change issues and engaging athletes to, kind of spread the word. And they have, very active presence. So really, really great nonprofit. So you put your money in that bank account, and not only is 1% of, what they make going to environmental nonprofits, but also the money that you're deposited, which is always doing something. It's not just sitting there in a bank account, is being invested in ways that are aligned with your values. It's not being invested in fossil fuel projects. So it's a really, really great way to kind of double the difference that you're making. And it's really opened my eyes to the role of finance and how important it is for all of us who really care about what we're doing and are making choices in other aspects of our lives to just think about where you're banking and go ask at your bank. They should know that you care about that. So I highly recommend it. And it's a fabulous product too. I'm sorry if I'm rambling on too long, but
No, not at all.
the debit card itself is compostable. And then every month when you get your statement, you also get a statement of the carbon footprint of your transactions. So they have this company that they're working with called Duconomy. That's a really amazing company based in Scandinavia. And they have figured out how to calculate the carbon transaction of all your financial transactions, so you can really learn about your purchases and move toward making changes and mitigating those impacts. So through and through, it's a really, really great opportunity to drive change.
Yeah, that is super. I mean, that's just amazing that these tools exist now. So that's awesome. Yeah, that and honestly, I didn't quite have I guess my head wrapped around the role that like what your money does in the bank. Like, it's like, oh, okay, well, I deposit this money in the bank and I just, without being a finance person or anything like that, you just kind of think, well, that's my money. It's just sitting in my account, and that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of, I forget which article I read about it, but I was like, no way. I was like, I mean, it was kind of mind blowing to me.
It's definitely a biggie, and it doesn't matter if you have a lot of money sitting in the bank or little. Like, what I like about 1% overall, and this checking account, really embodies it, is, everyone has 1%. Everyone has resources that are, big or small, how you sort of reflect your choices in the world. So, whether you're like most of us and just, kind of trying to pay your bills and have, some money in the bank, that money is still, whenever it's deposited, it's part of what the bank is using to invest. And so it is going out in the world and doing things, and it can do really good things for the planet, or it can do not so good things. And so it's really important that all of us are, and I'm sort of newly aware of this as well. So I feel like I've got like the zeal of the newly initiated, because it's just so clear to me that that's a big opportunity for all of us to not only feel more aligned in that our values are, really consistent across all that we're doing, but also really to drive some change.
Yeah, totally. And it kind of reminds me, as I'm sure you've read also, but it's kind of the book that got me on this whole sustainable business path was Let My People Go Surfing by Yvon Chouinard. And one of the takeaways and something that I've, as a sustainability consultant that I've taken from that is, basically you're just starting to ask questions. And it's no different if you were a manufacturer and you started to wonder, like, hey, I wonder what the environmental impact, of making our product is, or I wonder, what is the social impact of that? And so you start to ask these questions, and this is just kind of a different way of doing that, of just going, well, I've got my money in the bank. You'd have no reason to wonder what your money was doing in the bank, frankly. But someone asked that question, right? And that's how this thing probably got started. It's going, well, what is my money doing in there? And
yeah, definitely.
I don't support that. And so it's just this process of, asking questions and sort of leading this exam in life that I think is starting to open people's eyes up to kind of what's going on behind the scenes.
Definitely. And one thing I would say on that, which ties to sort of 1% broadly, is one of the things we hear from members, both business and individual, is that it can feel really overwhelming to know what to do. And, even imagine and I know when I sort of first kind of clued into the fact that my money in the bank, was, maybe not doing what I wanted it to do, I felt like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't know that. But what we really encourage is, don't feel overwhelmed. Just recognize, great, now you've learned something and you can do something. And again, that idea that everyone has a 1%, we like to think about that literally in terms of, the way our membership model works, but also figuratively, because it kind of reminds us, break it down to size. If you are 1% better every day, and if you imagine that you're doing that 1% better, if you're kind of leveraging your 1% every day, and everyone around you is too, it adds up. And that's what we are seeing. So last year, we certified more than 27 million in giving to environmental nonprofits. And that's made up of tiny companies, individuals with, their babysitting money, and right up to high net worth individuals and big companies. And everyone is equal. It's like truly democratic. Everyone is giving their 1%, and it all adds up to a really big number driving change, and everyone owns that number. So we really hope that can help break down the overwhelm and make it more manageable, just to chunk it out into, 1% every day. You got this.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, that's what makes it, sort of fair. It's not saying, hey, it's just 1% of whatever you have. So
Exactly. We're all in it together.
Yeah. So that's an important note. And another important thing, because you see this, and is that there's a difference between 1% of your gross sales or your revenue versus 1% of your gross profit, and that's a big difference. And 1% for the Planet members, just to be clear, we're all giving 1% of our total sales for the year. This is before tax, before anything. So that's what makes it a real commitment. But it's also something that's manageable and can be done. You just know that going into it, that, hey, this is part of the deal. And if we're projecting what we're going to do, I know that this is about what we're going to be donating, and being prepared to do that.
Yeah, thanks for calling that out, because that's a common misconception. I mean, most people assume it must be profits, because how can you commit to 1% until you know that you've got enough profit to do that? But it's actually, you're spot on that it's very intentionally sales, not only because that's a sort of more real number than profits. There's no way that you change what your sales are. They are what they are. Also, though, it's a really strong statement of, no matter how we do, we are still committed to the planet. So even if we have a year where we don't hit our target, or if we have a tough year, the planet still needs us. And any sales that we did, we still need to give 1% to the planet. And that's been a really important piece of it from the get-go. You mentioned Yvonne's book, Let My People Go Surfing. And for him, he, we don't necessarily use this as a marketing phrase, but he talks about it as an earth tax. Like, you don't get to decide if you want to support the planet that sustains all of us. You commit to doing that, and you do it, come hell or high water, which we are experiencing these days, I would say. But that's just a really important kind of piece of what the commitment is. And I think that actually is highly important to a lot of our members. And, it's certainly a value of our team, just how important that commitment is.
Well, what it is, I think if people actually understand that too, it adds, if you're a consumer, if you understand that's what the company's doing, then that adds a whole nother level of sort of respect and integrity and admiration for them, and even more of a reason to support them, because that they're committed and they're in it, versus a company just stating that a portion of sales go to conservation, or whatever the case may be. That's a totally different thing than saying, no, I commit 1% of my sales. So that's just one thing that I would point out if you're not familiar with 1% for the Planet members, is that's what they're committing to. And that's quite different than just saying, hey, we donate some proceeds of this product, or that's great, but it doesn't mean the same thing.
Exactly. And I would say just, we also, and this is, part of our work is to communicate this, but, we want consumers to know that it's 1% of sales certified every single year. So, we look at tax returns for our businesses. And then we match that to the receipts of their giving. So it's a very authentic and real commitment year in and year out. And and that matters because it's easy to say a lot of things, but to say them and do them, and to have, to build a level of trust that that's happening is really important to us. Because, we want to create a way that people, that we can create this virtuous cycle, as you were saying earlier, of, consumers saying, hey, given the choice, I'm going to choose 1%. So that drives more sales. So that drives a bigger 1%. So that drives more giving. So it's just a really, really important connection.
Yeah. All right. So 1% has been on the up and up. It seems like more members. Has there been any challenge? Because you've been the CEO for how long now?
5 years.
5 years. Has there been any challenges or hurdles that that you'd care to talk about at all? That in terms of growing 1% for the planet to where it is today?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, of course, there's always challenges. But I will say they're of the good type of challenge, meaning, figuring out how to grow and then figuring out how to deal with growth. So, on that latter piece, being a small nonprofit experiencing high growth, we've had times where we've had to kind of catch up from a capacity standpoint, with So, for example, in the first half of this year, we had close to 700 new members join. And, we pride ourselves and work really hard to provide great service to all our members. When you suddenly have 700 new ones after, the prior year in 2019, over the course of the year, we brought on more than 900 new members. So, that's a lot of relationships, and we aren't hiring new staff every month to manage those. So, we had some catch up to do, and we had some sort of busy days and heavy workloads in the meantime. We are catching up, and, working on that and figuring out our, systems to provide the best support. So, that's on the internal side of just, managing growth. And then, which again is like great challenge, exactly the challenge you want to have. Right. I think the other fun challenges are, which are, recast as opportunities, which doesn't mean they're easy, is, figuring out what does it look like to grow in the ways that we want to grow? Because for us as a nonprofit, and this isn't the case for all nonprofits, growth ties to impact. So more members, more giving, more money going out to nonprofits, more impact. So for us, growing is directly tied to delivering our mission. And so, we think about like, all right, so when we get to 10,000 members, what does that look like? What do we need to do to get there? And so how do we adapt to deliver on some of those kinds of strategies? And then how do we support that? What tech do we need? What new positions do we need? What is, how do we manage a growing remote team? Right now we have close to 21. We're hiring 21 people on our team, and we have a core group in Burlington, Vermont, which is where our headquarters is. But then we also have people on the West Coast and in St. Louis and in Boston. And so just, managing all of that. And then also, being really well connected to a global network of members. So, they're all just really great challenges. The challenge moments, it's interesting to look back because like when Trump was elected or, when there are wildfires or when this pandemic hits, it always changes the environment. So it changes, literally environment, but also just the environment in which we're operating. And, so we get new questions and that, flags for us new things that we need to do and new ways of working. So, so lots of learning always, but I think we're well set up to, we like that. We like being a learning organization. So,
yeah.
We're well set up for that. But so real challenges, all of which, I can easily flip to also being opportunities.
Well, I mean, I feel like, it's almost like you kind of have to be that way. Otherwise it's overwhelming. So it's here, this is an opportunity. And it sounds like maybe those are some of the lessons, that would probably be beneficial for any organization, and again, it kind of is going back to what we were talking about earlier is you're asking a lot of questions, right? And that's part of it, right? You got to figure it out. So whether it's what's our environmental impact or, hey, we're growing, like, all right, well, what do we need to do? What does this look like? So, interesting I've never kind of put those two together, but I'm always learning on these two. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
All right, so we are on the Sustainable Angler, Kate, and so I have to ask: do you get out and do much fishing at all? Is that a part of something that part of your outdoor, I guess, enjoyment?
I'll be straight up and say it's not right now, like my go-to for getting outdoors. But I will also say, like, I grew up in a family of fishermen, and they were my brothers and my dad, so I can say fishermen. We have a cabin, which is an old fishing camp on a lake in Maine, and I have like awesome memories of my dad getting us up early, and we'd go out and troll for northern pike on the lake, and I remember those were really, really fun to catch because they put up a good fight. So I remember as a little kid being like super excited about that, and then both my brothers and my dad were really into fly fishing, and one brother now lives out on the Yellowstone River. So we have had some fun fly fishing out there. He was actually a guide for a short period of time. So and when I was in Wyoming in the mountains there, we would definitely fish and, have some good meals actually with that. Yeah. So I have a lot of fishing. I'm kind of a person who likes to move around a lot. Like, I'm much more happy. Like, if someone wants to go fishing, it's like, great, let's go to the beautiful place where you're going to go fishing, and I'm going to go climb that peak over there. So that's a little bit more who I am, but I have a deep appreciation for the experiences that I've had fishing, and also for, the way it kind of gets you to beautiful places.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that you just said. So I took, hopefully my daughter is 22 months old. So last year we took her back out to Jackson. It was our first time, my wife and I, the first time that we'd been back since we lived out there. We were living in Wyoming from 2008 to 2011, and we hadn't been back since we moved back east. I'm in Charleston, we're in Charleston, South Carolina. Okay. So anyway, I took my daughter, Emma Claire, in a backpack and took her out, and we went fishing, and she will probably, she won't, she's too young to remember that. But you mentioned like, oh, you have these wonderful memories of that. And that's sort of what I'm hope to instill in her, is those memories. And I think you probably apply that to a lot of outdoor activities. Those are things that kids remember. I remember every time we went camping, growing up, and things like that. And so that's pretty cool that, even though your thing is your thing more climbing, or are you a climber?
Not so much a climber. I mean, I have climbed, but I'm really more like, I'm kind of an aerobic person. So I love, going for long hikes and long trail runs and things like that. But I will say, just listening to you made me realize, like, I think the great takeaway from all the different fishing experiences that I've had, which is very much still with me, is just the observation, like how you study the water and understand the water. And I think that's like, I love that about it, just like really understanding the stream and where would a fish be and what's happening here and what's the hatch. And so maybe I need to get back into fishing. You're kind of getting me interested again.
Well, you can go for a long hike in, stop and fish for an hour, and long hike back.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I will say, my son, who's 18 and who's, also spent a lot of time fishing in Maine growing up, he, this summer, because, we were, all plans were off kind of thing, he and his friends just got really into fishing. They just like throw the canoe in the car and go. We live in a place in Vermont where you can, go onto this one reservoir and they'd go fishing. And, so I also appreciate that it's a great way for some teenage boys to hang out and have fun and hopefully mostly make good choices. And they seem to do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I mean, that's super fun, and if you mix some camping in and, catch your dinner or your breakfast, it becomes a really fun experience. All right. So, what are some of the, 1% has sort of these core areas like climate, food, for me, just with my business, and also because I have a young daughter that I'm concerned about the impact of climate change in the world that she'll be growing up in. Are there areas that, because obviously everyone's concerned about all of it, but for me, it's climate is sort of my thing. Is there an area that you're more focused on, or I don't really know how to ask this question, but
as an organization, is there one that we're more focused on?
No, just, you as an individual.
Me personally, I would say that I'm an individual member. I've chose to be one of our founding individual members. And, I do my giving both locally in our community and then to organizations that have really meant a lot to me. So for example, the National Outdoor Leadership School, which I mentioned, which was sort of how I had that experience when I was 18. So they're an organization that I give to because I really believe in the importance of creating that opportunity for people to fall in love with the outdoors and connect to it in a really, meaningful way. And then locally, there's a local path organization that, gets the permission and maintains these great local trails through our valley. And that's just so important to the sort of well-being of the people in our valley. And there's a nonprofit that looks out for the health of the river, the Mad River that goes through our valley. So I really believe in that sort of local giving. And I would say that's actually what we see a lot with our members is, that often as they sort of go through thinking about where they want to give, they start with that, like, what's the big issue area that means the most to me? And then depending on the size of the company and sort of where their geographic footprint is, their giving often sort of drills down into, some local ways that they can drive change relative to that big issue area. And also where a lot of times too, where their employees can see and touch and feel that giving. Because we are, and I would say increasingly seeing that for a lot of companies, the giving, their 1% commitment is really, really important to their employees. And so the more those staff members can feel connected with the giving and have opportunities to go out and do volunteer stuff and things like that is really important. And then one last thing I'd say is I haven't done a lot of giving in this area, although I certainly, use my purchasing dollars in this area, which is, local and regenerative food, just because I believe that's an issue that touches, or that's a way to solve so many different issues. So regenerative agriculture is such an important tool relative to climate change. It's also a way that, land becomes healthier and there's less pollution. It's also a way that, habitat can be, better connected. So there's so many good aspects to that. So definitely very interested in that. And we do see a lot of our members supporting different nonprofits working in that space.
That's awesome. Yeah. And that's funny, that you said that, and that's the exact same thing that I did too with Emerger Strategies. Is I always donate to a bigger nonprofit, and then I'd also donate to local nonprofits because it's like the ones that we're volunteering with and are involved with. So might be an effective strategy for anyone considering joining too. To think about that you can kind of look at the big picture and then also make that local impact and make your community a better place to sort of live and work.
Yep. And then one thing too, just, in the spirit of what you're saying earlier about like always learning, I mean, one big area of learning for our team this year has been around, the issue of racial equity. And so we've been putting a lot of thought into and work into something that we had that was already underway, but we've really accelerated our learning in this area in terms of, what's the intersection between environment and, just social justice, racial justice issues, because there are a lot of, deep and important connections. And so, we're expanding the list of nonprofits that we have in our network who are working in that kind of overlapping space. So that's a really important area to me that I feel like I'm doing a lot of learning, and that our team and our model, there's a lot of learning going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of makes sense because like when you look at it from when I was learning about sustainable business, and so it's like, what does that mean? And so the easiest way to describe it is through, at least to me anyway, is what's called the triple bottom line. So you have your economic bottom line, but you also have your environmental and social bottom line, and they're all interconnected. Mm-hmm. And so that's probably that's an example of that, of looking into, social justice as part of your social bottom line that's directly connected to the environment and climate and things of that nature. So that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, all right, Kate. Well, I do like to also. We talked about a lot of great stuff today, but I also do like to sort of wrap things up with a really positive success story, or a message of hope, or something just really inspiring for the listeners to sort of walk away from and want to maybe take action. So do you have anything? I know this is off the cuff, so kind of in a loaded question. But
no, it's great. I mean, I have to say, 1% for the Planet is a really hopeful model. No matter what is going on in the world, that there are, I can just think of one of our nonprofits or think of a member partnership, and it's like, oh, that's hopeful. And actually at our global summit last year, we had a woman who runs a company called All Good. They make really great products, sunscreens and things like that are all, very natural and healthy. You've probably heard of them, and be great to use on the water while you're fishing. But she is an amazing woman, and she kind of gave us all at the summit this idea of hope spots, like places where the pieces are getting put together and good things are happening. And, 1% for the Planet is creating all these hope spots all over the world. So to be more specific, I guess I'd say, when the pandemic hit and, from, April 1st, middle of March, April 1st through June, we were kind of thinking who knows, are any new members going to join? Are we going to, what's going to happen? And we actually have grown. We've had more new members join in 2020 during that second quarter than in any other year.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah. And this is, and it's, in some cases it's, businesses who are in industries that are doing well. Cause as we know, there are some industries that are thriving, in these, the particular circumstances that we find ourselves in. Yep. But it's not solely those members that are doing really well. It's, in a lot of cases, it's companies who are saying, what, seeing everything that's going on has been such a wake-up call, and we just have to align our business with doing the right thing, and so we want to join 1%. So for me, the takeaway hope in that is that so many people, and people run companies, people make these decisions, so many people are just so resilient and able to sort of think beyond the immediate to see what we need to do for the future. So, for me, that's what gives me hope, because it's all right, if we can be resilient and gritty together and get through this and make commitments to our planet and to each other, then we've got this. We can make it through. And that's certainly the message we've been feeling, as with every passing month, our network continues to grow strong and stay strong.
Well, that's awesome, Kate, and that's probably the perfect note to wrap on.
Great, excellent.
Thanks for listening to the Sustainable Angler Podcast, and special thanks to Kate Williams of 1% for the Planet for carving some time out for me and for all of the good work that 1% for the Planet is doing. If you're not a 1% for the Planet member, I would encourage you to consider it and visit 1percentfortheplanet.org to learn more. If you like what you're hearing, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a rating and review on The Sustainable Angler, which is available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks, and have a good one.